Hi everyone, I hope that you all well and safe. Welcome to our fourth lecture in poetry. Before I start with the material of this lecture, I would like to remind you to watch the video very carefully because I have received some questions from students and these questions were elaborately explained and explicitly stated in the videos. So please let us keep the questions for the things that need exemplification and illustration, and not the things that were the bulk of the video. Today we are going to pursue our discussion of figures of speech. I think last time we stopped after we explained Emily Dickinson's poem, Hope is the Thing with Feathers. The reason why we cited this poem is to prove that there are poems which can be based on metaphors, and the poem was really based on an implied metaphor which extended from the beginning of the poem till its end. This makes it an extended metaphor. And what kind of metaphor? An implied metaphor. Today we are going to study another form of metaphor or another form of implied metaphor, which is personification. Probably you must have noticed that comparison is the basis of simile and metaphor, and it is also the basis of other figures of speech like personification. Now, what do we mean by personification? First, let us take the word itself. When we say personification, we remember the word person. And person is a noun, and if we want to change it into a verb, it becomes personify, and the noun is personification. And what do we mean by this kind of figure of speech, or what happens in the personification? What happens is really representation of an inanimate object or abstract idea as endowed with human attributes. That is, we give human equalities to objects and things. Through personification, for example, the branches of a tree become arms. The word arm is associated with human beings, but now it is given to the tree. Also, when we say that the sun smiles, the sun does not smile, the human being does. So here we personify the sun as a human being. The urge to personify, in fact, has been around for a long time, and it has been used as old as paganism. When we speak of trees, the sun, the moon, or the sea as gods and goddesses. And what is meant by this is that the urge to personify, that is to attribute human characteristics and feelings to inanimate objects, seems to have been felt in the earliest stages of man's history. That is, since primitive religions. Now, in modern life, we can come across some examples of personification. You might hear someone saying that the chair groaned under the weight of the fat person. Groaned. Groaning is associated with pain. Usually when people are in pain, they groan, but chairs do not groan. So we give a human equality to the chair. Also, when we say that the headlight of the car blinked, the headlight of the car blinked. Blinking is a human quality, not a quality that we usually associate with a car. So here we notice that we personified the car. In addition to that, we might say that the motor of the car coughed. Coughing is not something that is associated with cars. So what did we do here? We personified the car. In conclusion, we come to the fact that personification is a special form of metaphor an implied comparison, that is an implied metaphor, in which we add human qualities, feelings, or sensibilities to things and inanimate objects. Now let us move and talk about some examples of personification from poetry. I remember 2 lines of poetry in which the poet says, slowly, silently, now the moon walks the night in her silver shoon. Now, if we look at line number 1, the moon, we are okay with the moon, but when the poet says walks, and then her silver shoon, and shoon here means shoes. Now, the moon is no longer a thing, but it became a woman. And this woman wears silver shoes, and she walks the night. When we say she and we say walk, here we are giving human equalities. The moon doesn't walk, the moon doesn't wear shoes. In Beowulf, the earliest English epic, written during the 7th century, approximately to the 8th century, they speak of the dead body of their ruler as carried on board of a ship, and the description reads as follows: therein they laid him, their well-loved lord, their ring bestower, in the ship's embrace. In the ship's embrace. They laid their dead ruler in the ship's embrace. We are okay with the ship, but how about embrace? The act of embracing is a human equality. Actually, the ship can never embrace the body of the dead ruler, who is Beowulf here. So here we gave a human equality to the ship, which is the ability to embrace. So through personification, the ship becomes capable of embracing the Lord. Connotatively, his resting place is one of the tenderness and affection. They wanted to say that he has a resting place, and this resting place is tender and affectionate. Another example from poetry is Sir Thomas Wyatt. In his poem, the lover complaineth the unkindness of his love. And in Old English, complaineth means complains. Sir Thomas Wyatt here is famous for having written a lot of things about the Petrarchan love tradition in poetry, where the lover falls in love with a woman of extraordinary beauty. This woman is often unreachable and inaccessible. And often the lover complains of her cruelty to him, her reluctance, and her rejection of his love, her reluctance to accept him, and her rejection of his love. So oftentimes we notice that the poet complains of the fact that the beloved woman does not reciprocate the lover's randy affection. So in this poem, we have these 3 lines quoted from it. The rocks do not so cruelly repulse the waves continually as she my suit and affection. Okay, now let us start with this quote, specifically with line 1. Of course, I am here using page 61, as you probably know. The rocks are not really human beings, but the poet is using the word cruelly. Cruelty is associated with human beings. So there is here a kind of comparison between the beloved lady and and the rocks. Now, the rocks which are near the beach are often hit by the waves. But what do the waves do to them? Do they repulse them? Do they reject them? Actually, they don't. So he is implicitly comparing between his sweetheart or his lady and the rocks. But for him, his lady is actually tough on him, and her heart is not tender towards him. So she is more cruel than rocks. Because rocks do not reject the waves that hit them continuously. But his beloved lady rejects him, and she repulses his suit and affection. So he complains of his beloved's inability, or let us say unwillingness, to reciprocate or to requite his love. In this act, she becomes more cruel than the rocks. So the personified rocks are not so cruel in their resistance to the waves that break upon them as the lady is rejecting her lover. So here, through the double figure, the poet has endowed the lady with impressive cruelty. Impressive cruelty. She is more cruel than the rocks. Now, why is this a kind of personification? Because rocks do not feel. Rocks do not practice cruelty. And why do we call it implied? Because the writer did not mention the word human being. So as you must have noticed, the personification is an implied metaphor where the vehicle is always fixed. The vehicle is always the human being, or let me say a person. But this person is not clearly stated, but rather hinted at. So we don't use the word person, but we use something associated with the person. As I also said in my explanation of metaphor, an implied metaphor is a metaphor in which the vehicle is not clearly stated, but rather hinted at. In other words, the vehicle is not mentioned, but what is mentioned is something closely associated with the vehicle. Now, is it possible to have a poem which is based on personification from its beginning to its end? Yes. So after having studied 3 examples of poetry examples of personification, we are going to study an example of a poem which is based on personification. Today I've chosen Philip Sidney's poem or sonnet, With How Sad Steps, O Moon. Philip Sidney is actually a very famous sonneteer, that is, a writer of sonnets. He wrote many sonnets to his beloved lady. And this sonnet is just one example of many examples of his sonnets. It is a somehow more sustained use of personification than any other poem you might encounter. Since this is a sonnet, we are speaking of a poem of 14 lines. In the poem, the poet often poses a problem and concludes with a solution. So this poem is classified as an Italian sonnet. If you remember our discussion of stanza forms, we said that a sonnet, an Italian sonnet, consists of an octave, that is a stanza of 8 lines, followed by a sestet. The octave has the problem and the sestet has the solution. And here we notice that the poet follows the Italian sonnets formula, and also he follows a certain tradition in poetry. I think after we discuss the poem, we are going to talk about this kind of tradition. But at the beginning, let us start by reading the poem. With how sad steps, O moon, thou climbest the skies, how silently, and with how wan a face! What, may it be that even in heavenly place, that busy archer his sharp arrows tries? Sure, if that long with love acquainted eyes can judge of love, thou feelest a lover's case. I read it in thy looks, thy languished face, thy languished grace. I read it in thy looks, thy languished grace. To me that feel the like, thy state descries. Then even of fellowship, O moon, tell me, is constant love deemed there but want of wit? Is constant love deemed there but want of wit? Are beauties there as proud as here they be? Do they above love to be loved? And yet those lovers scorn whom that love doth possess? Do they call virtue their ungratefulness? Wow, what a poem. It's a very fabulous example of the sonnet form. Let us start by discussing the first line. With how sad steps, O moon, thou climbest the skies. Now the third line, the third word of the line, with how sad steps. And then we have O moon. Do we often associate the word sad with human beings or with the moon? Actually, this is a quality that we often associate with human beings. But who is sad here? It's the moon. And the poet says, O moon. And here we have another example of what we call the visual image. We notice that the poet is creating a visual image where he requires us to imagine that the moon is climbing the skies. But the presence of O also reminds us of another figure of speech, which is also very significant in poetry. The use of O plus moon is a kind of apostrophe. And apostrophe is mentioned in your book, page 63. And what we mean by apostrophe is the direct address of a person or a thing, whether this person or thing is present or absent. So it doesn't make any difference whether the thing is present or absent. But the fact is, we have direct address. Like when you say, oh God, you are directly addressing God. There is a poem that I referred to several times, which is London 1802. The poem starts with Milton. The poet addresses Milton directly. So what do we call direct address in poetry? We call it apostrophe. So let us go back to line 1 of the sonnet. The poet says that the moon is sad, and the moon is climbing the skies with these sad steps. Line 2, the poet says that the moon was silent, and it has a wan face. Wan here means pale. So the moon is silent, and the moon has a pale face. Notice that the personification example builds up. First we have sad, and second we have silently, and third we have wan. All these qualities are human qualities. They are not the qualities of things or objects. So the poet states the state of the moon. So why is the moon sad? Do you have any idea? The poet is still asking, what may it be that even in heavenly place that busy archer his sharp arrows tries? Now, line 4 couldn't have been understood by readers if they hadn't had an idea about a kind of tool in poetry and in literature in general, which is known as allusion. The poet here is alluding to something. What is this something that he is alluding to? He says the busy archer. If you are acquainted with Roman myths, you will know what he means. The busy archer is an allusion to Cupid, the Roman god of love. I'm sure you have seen a picture of Cupid, this little boy who is blind, and he has an archer. He shoots arrows at people and he causes them to fall in love. So yes, the busy archer is an allusion to Cupid, the Roman god of love. And the poet is asking a question. Is it possible that the busy archer, who is the god of love, has been hitting the people with his arrows? And where? Is it on earth? No, it's up there. Now, how did the poet know? Or how did the speaker in the poem know, to be specific? There is a speaker in the poem, and the speaker is the one who loves the lady, the lover, that is. So he says that when you are experiencing the same plight or the same dilemma, you're likely to understand the people who are in the same situation. So since the moon itself is in love, it can judge others who are also in love. And since the speaker is in love, he can judge the moon because the moon is also in love. So he feels the lover's case, let us say. What are the pieces of evidence that he collected to prove that the moon is in love? He answers by saying, I read it in thy looks. I look at your face and I read your looks. And reading your looks proves that you are in love. Also, he read it in the languished grace of the moon. Thy, which means your. Thy languished grace. Grace here means beauty. The beauty of the moon is languishing. The beauty of the moon has been marred because the moon has been suffering. The moon is love smitten, and that's why the moon is suffering. To me that feel the like, thy state descries. The poet says, well, you're not alone. I am also suffering. I'm also in love. And I show the same state. And the state here is related to being in love. Now, the poet here established this connection with the moon in his octave. So here, in the first 8 lines, the poet tries to establish a kind of connection with the moon, a kind of fellowship that make them suffer. They are in the same situation. What's the similarity between the two? Both are in love. So what does the poet want to achieve by establishing this kind of fellowship? I think he will tell us in his sistet. Then even of fellowship, O moon, tell me. Please, because we are fellows, tell me. And O moon here, O moon is a second example of apostrophe in the poem. The poet here used another example of apostrophe when he directly addressed the moon. Now, after having said that he and the moon are in the same situation, he wants to seize the chance and to ask a number of questions. And who is supposed to answer? Yes, the moon. Question number 1. Is constant love deemed there but want of wit? Constant love, that is love which does not change. Constant lovers are lovers who are faithful to their beloved ones. There is a reference to the moon. But want, I want you to notice here, but want of. Since we have of, which is a preposition, after want, then want is not a verb. You know that. Want of wit here does not mean want like I desire something or I need something. Want of wit means lack of wit. Want of wit means lack of wit. Now, what's the meaning of wit here? It's like intelligence, prudence, yes? Let us now paraphrase this question. Is it true that faithful lovers are seen as people who lack intelligence? Okay? Is it true that people look at constant lovers as people who lack prudence and intelligence? Are beauties there as proud as here they be? So after having said the first question, he goes to the second one. But before I move to the second question, I want to remind you that a lot of times people associate love with madness. So the poet is hinting at the fact that lovers are mad and therefore they lack wit. And why do they lack wit? Because they are madly in love with beauties. And these beauties are very proud. Don't forget that this was part of a tradition. The beloved lady should always be inaccessible and unreachable. The speaker in these poems often languishes in pain and suffers because his beloved lady does not want to reciprocate his love. That is, she doesn't want to love him back. And during the times when Philip Sidney was writing, oftentimes beauties are described as proud. So out of this pride, the ladies do not want to love back. The third question is, do they above love to be loved? Love to be loved, and yet those lovers scorn whom that love doth possess, and whom that love doth possess. Do they above, and above refers to the sky. Do women love to be loved, and then they scorn those who are possessed by their love? I think the word scorn is very important here. I have read this word in Queen Elizabeth's poem. Queen Elizabeth wrote a poem entitled When I Was Fair and Young. And in this poem, the queen regrets the fact that she rejected so many suitors. And she mentioned the word scorn. So it seems to me that in the Renaissance time, it was a tradition that the beloved lady, who is often very beautiful and proud of herself, should always reject lovers and should be reluctant to fall in love. she should show her coyness rather than her acceptance of the lover. And it is no wonder then that the word scorn becomes a key word in the poetry of this period in the history of England. So he is asking a question. Is it true that beloved women would love to be loved by men, and once they love them, they scorn them and they send them away? Do they call virtue there ungratefulness? Notice here the poet is saying that I want to ask you, do women in the place where you live call virtue by a different name? That is, they are ungrateful to their lovers, and if you ask them why they are ungrateful, they will tell you that this is virtue. So the reason why they reject their lovers is that they want to show their virtue. That is, for the woman to prove that she is virtuous, she should reject her lover. This is the female's point of view. But if we want to look at the male's point of view, the male here doesn't consider this to be virtue, but he considers it to be ungratefulness. Well, do you smell some prejudice here? Like women should be grateful for men if they love them? This is for you to answer. So, this is our poem, and if you have noticed, the poet personified the moon in the first line, and this personification extended from the first line of the sonnet till the end of the poem, that is, from line 1 to line 14. The poem is divided into two parts. The octave, which consists of 8 lines where the poet actually described his problem, and the sestet, in which he asked the questions, or he offered a sort of solution, which is asking the moon for help and for understanding what's going on in the world of love and mistresses. One of the important things I've noticed here is the use of the courtly love tradition. And I mean by courtly, C-O-U-R-T-L-Y. I mean by courtly related to the court. During the times of Queen Elizabeth, when poets used to write love poems to their mistresses, and they used to recite them to their beloved ladies in the royal courts, we notice that the poet should show how randy he is in his love and how reluctant the lady is. Now, what is the result of this reluctance or lack of acceptance? It is the sickness of the lover. So this tradition emphasizes that the lover often suffers from physical symptoms as a result of his suffering in love. So in the courtly love tradition, which is associated with the royal courts of Britain, where the lover would go kneel and try to recite a poem to his beloved lady, who often rides the high horse and does not accept him. This is why it's courtly. But what is the courtly love tradition? It's a tradition in love where the lover is very passionate and he is deeply in love with a woman, but this woman does not love him back or does not reciprocate his love. As a result, he suffers deeply and greatly, and this suffering will reflect itself on his facial expressions and specifically on his health. He will start losing weight, he will lose vitality, he will become pale and probably bedridden. I feel that this is much of a tradition rather than a real situation. And you know, in the world of poetry, we have some fashionable things, exactly like we have it in the world of fashion and clothes, etc. It's fashionable to wear this, it's fashionable to wear that. Similarly, it is fashionable to write using this kind of tradition. So this poem by Philip Sidney actually applies the courtly love tradition, in which the poet describes a woman of extraordinary beauty. This woman is often inaccessible and unreachable, and because of that, the poet, the speaker in the poem, suffers a lot. He loses his weight, vitality, and probably he will become pale and weak. Okay. If you also look at the end rhyme of the poem, we notice the octave has the following rhyme: A, B, B, A, B, B, A. And then C, D, C, D, E, E. So we notice the use of the rhyme scheme of the octave, the typical rhyme scheme of the octave, and a new variety of rhyme in the systet. Because the basic rhyme scheme in the systet is often C, D, E, C, D, E, but the poet did not use C, D, E, C, D, E. He used, as I said, C, D, C, D, E, E. Okay, let us go back to personification, since the poem is an example of personification. Here, the personification is very effective. And another effective thing here is creating a visual image of the moon, which enables us to see the moon with its one face sadly and silently rising, climbing the skies. So as we reach line 3 and 4, as I said, we come to the conclusion that the moon is like the lover, suffers from love sickness. This is the theme, love sickness. And love is familiarly personified as an archer who has been using his sharp arrows. Now, the poet is sure that his long acquaintance with love has made him interpret the moon's melody correctly as love longing. The moon's languished grace describes his inner state. Then the poet inquires about the nature of love in the regions inhabited by the moon, that is the sky, thereby revealing the difficulties encountered by earthly, not heavenly now, by earthly lovers. Now, constant love is deemed want of wit, beauties are proud, ladies love to be loved, yet scorn their lovers, and ungratefulness is called virtue. The beauty of the poem here is not only creating the personification example, but this beautiful image of the moon as being stricken by love sickness. I want also to emphasize that in this poem, the poet, as I said, used two examples of apostrophe, and this was also functional within the context of the poem. So this is our poem, and I hope that you understand it. And if you have any questions, you can ask using the comments after I post the video on my page. Before I finish with the issue of personification and its function in poetry, I want to cite a number of examples from other poems, but I will keep this for next time in order to reinforce your understanding of. Remember to watch the video and to read the poem. The poem is on page 62. Remember that next time I will be moving to page 64. I will cite more examples of personification just to reinforce your knowledge of personification, because next time, inshallah, I will be talking about the employment of metonymy and synecdoche in poetry, and we will cite different examples from poetry. Until then, I wish you all the happiness and all the health, and thank you very much. See you next time.